Gotta go. Yeah, I'll call you back. I'm with that real Kelly.
In every real estate transaction, something comes up that the buyer or seller may have a question about. But in the heat of the moment, the question goes unanswered. Each episode, I talk with real estate experts and real estate vendors to provide a look at what goes on behind the scenes in the real estate world to get you answers. I blend in local Santa Cruz history, add some tips and tricks, all designed to help you be successful in your next real estate project. Tell your friends you can't talk right now because you are with the Realtor Lady. All right, we have Tatiana here. So please tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do, and maybe just a tiny bit of what Wings does. I don't think we have enough time to talk about what they do. And then we'll get into the myths about the homeless population here in Santa Cruz and legislation, and maybe some things about what people can do.
Hi, well, my name is Tatiana Stone, and I do communications and development for Wings Advocacy. And Wings Advocacy is a small local nonprofit that is volunteer powered, and they help people on the journey out of homelessness. So they help people reduce barriers to housing by getting vital documents, which are needed for getting a job and getting housing, etc. And they also help give people stabilizing supplies once they move into permanent housing, which is a key piece of the puzzle after people are no longer homeless, to make sure that they have what they need to succeed in their new housing.
Well, because promotion is what you do of our organization, you did that very well. I think I would have taken the full half hour and done that. So, well,
glad to help.
And I'll just jump in and say what I do. I'm not sure if in the intro I put that in there. I do notarization to help them get the birth certificate. And I have about an hour and a half in Watsonville every about 3 weeks or so to help people get their paperwork in. So go ahead and start with misinformation. What's one of the top 3 myths? Can't say that word.
I think the top myth that I hear from people repeatedly is that people who are homeless in Santa Cruz must be from somewhere else. And sometimes that myth gets perpetuated so far as to people say really high percentages. Sometimes they say all of the people, sometimes they say most. And the data we have consistently, and I say this because it's every 2 years, we do a point in time count. It's basically a census of people experiencing homelessness in Santa Cruz. And now the schedule was a little messed up by COVID recently, but previous to that, it's been going on for quite a while, every 2 years. And there is a survey component where we actually send volunteers and staff out into the community and interview people experiencing homelessness and talk to them about a number of things on the census questions. And one of those questions is, where did you live prior to becoming homeless? That's a real important question. And when we're coached to give these surveys, we're coached to make sure to not do any leading answers or anything like that. It's very important that there's strong data integrity. And we're taught to have a conversation with people. If they're a little confused, where did you live? Well, they start giving you an address or something. And so you go, okay, well, where was that? And so that's all to give you how that data is collected. Now, again, every 2 years, so time after time, the data has borne out that around 75% of people currently experiencing homelessness during the time the survey was done lived in Santa Cruz prior to becoming homeless. And I'll say that again. Around 75% of people experiencing homelessness lived in Santa Cruz, housed prior to becoming homeless. And I think that that's a really important thing to realize, that there's also about 60% of those people lived here for more than a couple years. So it wasn't like they just moved and became homeless. They lived here. They were established residents.
I was doing an intake with a gentleman and realized about midway through, I went to high school with him. And it was pretty jarring. And then I worked with some families. I recognized the older sister. And I understood some people that I was working with. They were members of families that I knew. And I know we talked about it in our pre-conversation that I want to add in here is there are a lot of families that they've had children, they've had a lot of children. And when that parent dies, they're typically a lot older. And that safety net for that younger child who may have not had the means to figure out how to take care of themselves lose their safety net. And what turns out is their siblings are much older and not in any position to help them. That's very prevalent in Watsonville for very large families. There doesn't seem to be any room left in those families or bandwidth left. I'm not trying to judge them, but
no, it's
yeah, it's just frustrating too, because it's like that whole familial system that was there for so many years and helped so many of those other members of that family, and they're all, housed. And this particular person just, and they can't kind of figure out how to do it on their own.
It's actually pretty common for multi-generational households in poverty. And this is true across the US, that this is a common thing where sometimes the older generations, either maybe they own the property or maybe they're grandfathered into some sort of rent control in places that have that. Maybe they have a lease that's only in their name or a housing voucher only in their name that is non-transferable to their dependents, who are sometimes not their direct dependents too. It's important to remember in multi-generational families, it isn't just a direct line we think of, son and then daughter and then whatnot. Right. Sometimes it can be nephews and nieces and all kinds of blended family makeup. And sometimes they're dependent on just a couple people who help make sure that the roof stays there. And once those people are gone, there's really not a lot of other options for them. And also I've had the same experience of working with people and realizing, gosh, I went to high school with this person. Or sometimes even worse, I went to elementary school with these people.
Yeah.
Because I did all of my schooling in Santa Cruz, all the way from kindergarten through high school. And so there's a lot of people that I came in contact with just because, and a lot of people I recognized all going through school. You go to school with the same people. Santa Cruz isn't that big.
Right.
And so to see some of them now when I walk down the street and they're, with a big cart and I see them outside all the time and I go, gosh, I remember that person. And these are people who have been in the community for decades, right? Not just like some fly by night, not that wouldn't be okay. A lot of people move to Santa Cruz too. And another thing to bring up is that 75% of people experiencing homelessness who were living in Santa Cruz previous to becoming homeless, that stat mirrors the housed population. Around 70-ish% of housed people living in Santa Cruz are from Santa Cruz, meaning they lived here for a while or were born here, and 30% moved from outside. So it's a pretty similar demographic makeup.
And it's just ingenuous to the homeless population to blame them for coming to this community when Monday morning in the Sentinel every week, Eric, I think it's Ross Gibbs, he talks about the people who come to our community from other areas as far back as the early 1800s. And it's every week. And a lot of times those people end up moving around. It's amazing to me how hard it was for them to move around and how much they did move around and didn't just plant roots in Santa Cruz and stay. I mean, if you go back in time, we are just an area that has a lot of transition going on, and people coming and going. So we have to keep that in mind too. I always have to remind people, it's like, oh, the rich people are moving here. It's like Millionaire Row on West Cliff Drive is, I think, over 150 years old now. One of those people were from here.
Yeah,
millionaires have been coming here for a while, so we need to keep all that in perspective.
I feel like Santa Cruz has had a kind of hard time adapting over the past maybe 4 or 5 decades from when it used to be a bedroom community, pre-UCSE sort of, and then it became something else, and it turned into a real haven for artists and other people. But that was back when it was more affordable.
Right.
When my family first moved to Santa Cruz when I was 6 years old, we moved there so my mom could go to school, which is a common scenario for lots of people I've talked to who've moved to Santa Cruz. And there was a lot more options for housing and a lot more affordability. And that has just really drastically changed, which adds to the homelessness problem. Affordable housing is a huge component of that. And I don't just mean affordable housing that's, by legislation affordable, but also just housing that is more in line with what people are making in 1995 and 1993 and stuff. When we were looking for places, there were more options. But even then, it was still really hard. So this is a problem that has been growing for a long time. People might have only seen the encampments in the last couple of years, but it is not a new problem.
Right, right. And that's really true. I also understand too, people need to understand where housing has gone, and that's for a whole different conversation of families who have owned homes, and maybe the families would have lived together a little longer than they do now. But if they have an extra house, then that family member may go live in that. And on our street, we have a house that was a rental that became a family member's rental. They rent it from the owner, but I believe it's an aunt. And you'll hear more of that. And my own son lives in my rental versus me having a bigger house or having him live on the property. So those are those ties that have also taken up. I mean, he would be renting anyway, but housing has changed.
Yeah. And it's an important thing to understand, apart from just that one example, that this is a much larger pattern happening all over, that as housing becomes more strict, a lot of these or more tight, a lot of these units that people would normally rent to others are rented to family ties, which is fantastic for the family safety net for those people. Like, I really think that's a wonderful thing. But at the same time, it means that, then this housing stock, how are we going to build it? And if it's only these little ADU type things, these accessory dwelling units, how fast is that really going to solve the problem?
Yeah, definitely. Number 2 you had for me, why do they stay homeless? Or was it, how do they get home? I don't know. You'll have to back over number 2 for me.
Well, a lot of people seem to, the next myth that I hear the most often, and this is kind of a close tie for that other one, is that people who are homeless must want to be homeless. And therefore they must stay homeless because they want to be. And I hear this everywhere I go across the country. I have asked people every time I ride in an Uber or anything when I travel for work. People always ask, "Oh, what are you here for?" And if I say work, and they say, "What do you do?" And I start talking to them about homelessness. And almost invariably, everyone I talk to anywhere I go in the United States, they say, so why do so many people want to be homeless? Or some variation of that question. So this is, again, not unique to Santa Cruz, but is still quite prevalent in Santa Cruz. And I think the most important thing that I would want to say to bust that myth is that it is not easy to be homeless. I think some people hear about the services like food and shelter, and they imagine a much more comfortable version of those things. When you or I imagine shelter, we imagine our homes, and we feel at home there, and that feels nice. And we have the things we need when we want them. We can sleep in. We have all these choices. If we're sick, we can stay in. The food that we get to choose our food. When you're homeless and you need those basic resources, all of those choices I just talked about, all of those feelings are really gone. When you stay at a shelter, you don't get to sleep in. If you're sick, you have nowhere to go. If you stay at a shelter and you have a pet, you might not be able to bring your pet. You might not be able to bring your child, if they're a male over the age of 12, to many different shelters.
Wow.
You might have to figure out how to separate from your family. You might not be able to stay with your spouse because you have to go to men's and women's barracks.
Yeah.
All of these things that we think of as our house as, oh, well, that's really cushy. It's not really cushy. And food, you don't get to choose your food. You don't get to choose when you eat. You don't have anywhere to keep your leftovers. You don't have any of the choices that we would have. And seems like a luxury to some people, but it is something that I think is part of real basic human dignity. That I understand why we can't offer all of these choices, of course, but it's just so important to remember that it is not easy to be homeless. And when I did the point in time count for a while there, I was working at an agency where I helped organize the point in time count. I was a case manager for a while, and then I worked in administration at one of the homeless services organizations here in town. And I did a lot of the surveys myself. And so over the course of, I think, the 4 years where we did 2 surveys, I surveyed about 1,000 individuals myself. So a fairly big N number, right? In statistics we're talking about. Not huge, certainly not the whole population, but a lot of people. And of all those people, only a handful said they chose to be homeless. And when I asked them what that choice was about, it was because their options were not very good. Their options were either go back to an abusive family or be homeless. And surprise, they chose homelessness. Or their options were to live in this really tiny little, bedroom that their family member or friend made out of a closet. And they couldn't bring people over, and they couldn't do this, and they couldn't do that, and they couldn't have this, and they, couldn't use their kitchen. And so, shock, they chose to be homeless because they had just a little more autonomy and comfort, which is funny because it's still, again, not comfortable, but it means that it's ironically sometimes safer than being in really bad situations for people. So that's what I would say is that, one, it's very not easy to be homeless. It's very difficult finding out where you're going to get fresh water, where you're going to use the bathroom, getting constantly hassled by people, sometimes physically harmed by other members of our community who do not like homeless people, and with very little recourse from the police should that happen. And the other thing is that when people do choose it, it's usually because it's the lesser of two evils.
You touched on so much there, so entirely much. So I lived in an area where we had a field outside of our window. My kids were little, and there was a man who lived there, and he slept in the field, and he had a pretty decent setup. My son got a job at some point and ended up working with him, and found out he was, is it agoraphobic? He actually couldn't live in a house. He actually didn't have that option, and he could only live outside. So leading to another point you bring up. So his situation was, I have a job, I have means of taking care of myself, but I have this problem. And then he had to make himself safe. And that's the other thing people do not understand is the security aspect. It's just give it away. I mean, there's sometimes when people tell me their situations about their backpacks and wallets, and really where it's almost easier for them to give those things to people than deal with the consequences of not. And they tell me, well,
violence.
Yeah, it's just like they took my backpack, and as they described to me, I was like, wow, them having your backpack with your best alternative at that point, and not even being able to keep your documents secure on you. And then every once in a while, I'll meet somebody who has everything with them all the time, and I marvel at them because I understand how hard that is, and I'm how do they do that, and what is it for them to keep all these very secure documents on them? I should note that Wings does keep birth certificates for people if that helps. But yeah, security. And then I want to just throw in one more thing, because in our area, that artery between River and One, where we have quite a few people crossing. A lot of times I think we see the people who are very egregious in their homeless activities, and then they become representative of a population as a whole. Yes. And we only meet, you and I don't meet near as many as you do. I only meet the people who are trying to figure it out. I generally don't meet those people that are making those crossings. I meet people who are very humbled, and they are inebriated sometimes at some point, or they're coming down from something, but they are still people who are interested in changing their circumstances, where there's other people that are just like, I'm going to do it. And, I'm going to be out here, which is a problem, because then that becomes your representative of a whole community that you may never meet. I mean, meeting the families with children and couples that try to stay together, who I believe those couples are am I going off on a rant? Listen to me. But I'm just going to go for it. But the couples that I meet that try to take care of each other break my heart, because I know that they have to spend a lot of their time separate because they're not married, and the resources to them don't come as easily as the married couples, but they're taking care of each other.
Yeah.
They may have each other's ID, or they may be able to, and they're always in partner. You know, they have, this one can do this and this one can do that, and this one can write and this one can't. And, you know, they work together. And when you meet them, though, you'll never see them walking across the street on a red light, or, you know, twirling something. You know, they're just people trying to survive, and it just seems unfair. So that's my rant.
And I think too, it's important to back up to the thing you said before about people trying to change their circumstances. I would argue that even the people we see doing behaviors that we feel are maladaptive are still trying to change their circumstances.
Sure.
But they may A, not know how, or B, they might have given up.
Yeah.
Not necessarily forever, but maybe temporarily. I mean, I don't know if you've ever experienced it, but for those listening who have ever experienced any sort of depression, or know any family members who have, if you've ever known that experience of people where they have trouble getting out of bed, they have trouble doing things.
Right.
Imagine what that would be like homeless, when you do not have that option to stay in bed, because literally somebody rousts you out of where you are and tells you that they're going to call the cops, or perhaps the cops are the ones telling you to leave. And so where do you go when you're feeling that depressed? I mean, A, you don't really have a lot of options. And B, you're probably not going to be caring quite as much about all those things that you and I remember to care about, the basic everyday, societal contract things that we take for granted, because we're in a place where we have the capacity to deal with those. And that's not even to mention, of course, the people with other forms of mental illness that might not even be aware of those certain things, like red lights and other stuff, which is still very dangerous, because people at that intersection, actually, of 1 and River Street, people die there every single year. Mm-hmm. It's not just like, oh, it happened 5 years ago. That happened every single year. There is more than one person who is hit at that intersection, and they are not always crossing when they're not supposed to be. It's really important to understand. It's not just, quote,
they're not
crazies.
Always homeless too. There was one.
And they're not always homeless.
From the
It
art
is a dangerous,
community.
scary intersection.
Yeah. Bicycles as well. And I don't want to make light of them. I just want to make sure that people don't lump one person who, you know, I just don't want that one person who is doing something that you find so terrible for you to just lump everybody in that person's basket for whatever they're doing.
And that's the best message, honestly, to take from any of this. If anyone listening remembers just one thing, it's that not all homelessness looks the same, right?
Right.
Families are really different sometimes from each other, which are different from individuals, which are different from homeless age youth, which are different from homeless seniors. You know, there are people living in their cars. There are people in tents. I mean, the list, I could go on for this entire time just about all the different types. So to just remember that one person that you see, or even 5 or 10 is not representative of a population of thousands.
That sounds like a really good campaign, like just kind of pictures of, you know, consenting members who would show. I mean, the gal that you and I met together there in Watsonville, and you interviewed her. She was great. She had so much information for us and was kind of telling us about what was going on. And I felt like I learned a lot from her. And then the people she was taking care of in her situation, she had, like, I think a granddaughter. I think she had a few people she was taking care of. I thought she was amazing.
Yeah, there's a lot of really amazing people out there who struggle with homelessness. And I think the other thing, the last big myth that I will bust, is that homeless people cannot take care of themselves. Mm. And I think that this is the important thing to note about why this isn't true, is because that puts us in a model that we, the housed, are the people who have our stuff together. And we, the housed, are the people who know what they need simply because we are housed. And that we should be the ones to tell them when they need things and how they need things. And I think it's really important to just break all that down right now. That is just not the case. There are times where there are people who definitely need help taking care of themselves. And that also happens in housed people. I've met several housed people who have a lot of trouble taking care of themselves. And it doesn't necessarily affect their housing because they have supports they need and they have resources, right? We, as the housed people, our job is not to tell homeless people what they need, but to listen and then provide the resources and the safe spaces for them to be able to take care of themselves.
Right.
They are not inherently, because they are without a house, incapable. Many, many people experiencing homelessness have more education than me.
Yeah.
Have more education. I mean, I don't know about you, but there's many people who are homeless I've met who have a lot of education. Maybe they have a lot of experience. Maybe they've done stuff for so many decades, things that I would never know how to do. So they know a lot. And this is not just some kind of touchy-feely, everybody gets a consolation prize because they tried. I mean, this is literally true that they have a lot of experience taking care of themselves, and they're still, pardon me, they're still here. So,
well,
and
not to oversimplify it, because I think what you're saying is so amazing. I think we need to just all sit back for a minute and really appreciate how hard it is to really just do everything in the world. I mean, just owning a car, getting insurance, paying a bill. They like to change how you can pay a bill. Now it was, you could go into an office and pay cash, and maybe you worked a cash-based business, and now they've decided they only want credit cards and you can't get a credit card. And, it's in our fast-paced tech world, it keeps changing. And for us housed, or even people who are completely privileged, and I will say I am one of those people, I get completely frustrated sometimes and go, how am I supposed to pay this bill? What do you mean? What do you want from me? And or I've started a business, and the government is ridiculous in how many things they want. And some of these organizations who have sent me bills, some of them are not real.
Oh, yeah.
And they stay down in the bottom. So I think about the seniors. So where's our senior that's being just fleeced, potentially homeless, because they thought they owed money to? I mean, what I'm presenting is this large picture of how hard it is, maybe just to kind of deal. And maybe sometimes if you could just live simply on an ADU where someone else paid all those bills and you paid them to do it, and you had, possibly even a caseworker to help you get through the day to day. And then all you do is figure out how to get to the grocery store and hopefully pay for that food. You know what I mean? I'm saying for some people, they may just need life simplified, because it is not simple.
And what you're saying is you're really describing permanent supportive housing, for the most part.
Right.
Which is the idea that there are some people who are homeless who have a higher degree of need for support. And the idea is, again, not all homeless people, but there is this subset, and they're good candidates for what we call permanent supportive housing, which means they live in housing that has supports built in. So they have a caseworker and they have people to help them with those sorts of things, and they're not on their own. And permanent supportive housing is for people of any age who basically were chronically homeless, which means they experience a disability as well as homelessness at the same time, or had many bouts of homelessness in the last couple of years and also had a disability. And that is so true about the fast-paced tech world we live in. Is very difficult for us housed people to keep up quite often with a lot of resources. I know I find myself in that position many times. I have over the years, and I still continue to. I get something and I don't know how to do it, and they need my identification and they need this and that. And every time I do that and I get mad, I stop and imagine what it would be like if I was trying to deal with this when I was homeless. Mm-hmm. If I had to figure out how to call the DMV in the morning when I couldn't charge my phone after I'd been up all night because I was assaulted, and I had to stay awake. Like, how terrible is it? I think it's torture to call the DMV on a good day when I'm feeling good. No offense to the DMV. It's just, very stressful. And this is another plug for the Vital Docs work that you do, Michelle, with Wings, is people, when they're trying to do all this difficult stuff, our fast-paced tech world is predicated on identity. That's the way we can do things virtually, is through identity. And when you don't have an ID and you can't get one because you don't have a birth certificate, you are just really screwed. Pardon my language, but you are just really out of luck.
Yeah. Yeah. And I won't go into some of the government organizations who don't realize how hard they are making things. But, I have to say I have a new appreciation for California, dealing with some other states. And when I read in the paper some of the rights that they're trying to pull back from their citizens, we can see directly in our work how it affects people. And it's terrible. At a party when I'm just like, oh no, you don't want to start with me because and I'm self-professed just dealing with the very, very, very tiniest bit and little tiny bit of homeless experience, yet getting these grand optic views of just inherent discrimination of all. Guess what? You get to be part of any group, and there's a way for them to take something away from you. And we've seen it, and it's terrible. And California tries. They try.
Yes.
It's true. From what I've seen, I really think
true.
They try, and I understand it's difficult. And I think they do. I feel like the government does understand that there's a lot of quagmire in the system.
And common sense legislation, like when the birth certificates were made free for people who were born in California, legislation like that has a really big impact. So when things like that come up, either on the ballot or they're on the platform of someone who is running for some office that you are voting for, think about those kind of things that help reduce barriers to people breaking the cycle of poverty. Because that's what it's really about. I mean, homelessness is about many things, but poverty and lack of resources is one of the biggest. And so if we can help people break those.
And they don't get those documents to get free stuff. Those are all basics that we should.
And they're also to get jobs.
Yeah.
I talked to a man the other day. I did an interview with him, and he was explaining how having a birth certificate is going to allow him to get an above board job. And he brought up some stuff that I had never thought about before, where he said, when you have a job and it's on the books, you can make sure your employer pays you. If you're under the table and your employer says, I don't want to pay you this week, you have no recourse. Yeah. You have nowhere to go to. You have none of the wage and hour protections that we have fought so hard for the last almost 100 years, right? These wage and hour protections, they're essential to workers. And you don't have them. And if they want you to work 60 hours in a week or they still fire you, you better do it because it's under the table. Like, you don't have any of those options. And so that really struck me as like, wow, this guy, he was making it work. He was getting a job and he was working, but he really wanted to get his birth certificate so he could get his ID, so he could get a legitimate job.
How many people do you run into that have jobs that are homeless? I don't run into any.
The people that I run into, it feels to me like it's around, I don't know, maybe like 2 to 4 out of every 10, roughly. And the stats are around 30% are currently employed, and a percentage then after that are looking. There are a lot of people who are experiencing homelessness who cannot work due to disability, and that is important to note, that it's not like they are just choosing to not work because they don't feel like it. And then the other important thing to note is that some people who are experiencing homelessness have a disability and want to work, but will not be hired because there are not jobs available for people with disabilities. That's a really important thing to remember.
That kills me.
Not everyone has the luxury of getting a job.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember growing up, there was programs in the grocery stores. It seems like they've gone away. That just seemed like they were always so helpful, and just a few kids. We went to one of the kids we went to school with at Santa Cruz High. He had a job at the local grocery store, and he was part of a special ed program, and he He loved that job. That was everything for
You're a
him.
Cardinal too?
I am a
I didn't know you went to
Cardinal.
Santa Cruz High too. Nice. Me
You
too.
know, I don't know
Yeah,
anything
those
about that
kind of
school today,
things.
but when I went, it seemed very diverse and a lot of different, whenever I talk, because I am a realtor and I represent the community.
Mhm.
So I'm talking, whenever I talk about Santa Cruz High, it's just always glowing because I hung out with so many different facets of the community. And I just thought it was great. And I thought if that was the kind of experience that you wanted for your kid, I think you can still get it there of just, kind of,
Yeah,
just there's a lot of large slices of different lives there, which I think is a really good way to
there
go to
is.
school.
When I was there in the early 2000s, I knew a lot of other students who deliberately chose to go there, even though they weren't in the regular district, because it was a more diverse school. I heard that a lot. Again, I don't know how that is because it's been a while since I was in school. But yeah, the diversity of Santa Cruz County is another thing that I think is hard for people to grasp because, and this is a bigger thing, it's hard for us to understand larger numbers than we see, right? Just as humans. So if we see maybe 100 homeless people, we think that that is somehow representative of the whole population when maybe that's such a small fraction. And realistically, it probably is because our homeless point in time count, the one that we do every 2 years that I mentioned earlier, the census, it counts people experiencing homelessness on a single day.
Hmm.
And that's the number. So our most recent
Yeah,
number,
what is
I believe, was 2,167 people, and that was in 2019. And we're planning on doing another count in about 20 days at the end of this month, delayed from COVID again. But so that 2,167 is actually just people on a single night. So people who are experiencing homelessness throughout the whole year, unique individuals, is definitely more.
Hmm.
And when I used to work for some agencies, I know that we would see around 3 times the pit count in a year of unique individuals coming for various services. So it's a statistical lower bound. And it's important to remember that our individual experiences with homeless people are probably too small to make generalizations. And that goes for honestly any group. Your experience with X is probably too small to generalize about the larger population, and just something for our own internal bias as we all work towards a more equitable view and a more equitable future and seeing the future we want. This is a really concrete thing we can do, is to help remember that our experience is really small, and to help tell everyone else that when they say, well, I've met 4 people and they all said this, so I think 100% of the people say that. It's just not how it works.
Yeah, I've met a nice slice, and they all have very different experiences. I think one of the other things I was always surprised is they did have a place to go. We had one who lived behind our building. I don't think this was his name, but he told me his name was Jack, and he would play music. And people would try to tell him to go away, and I was like, why would you tell him to go away? He's fine, and he keeps other people from sleeping there, and he's happy there. So, and that got everybody to kind of calm down. But then the other building decided he needed to go. Well, when he left, his brother finally convinced him to come home. But I don't think that was a real amiable situation for him. But when Jack left,
It's hard.
we had a really nasty group move in because there was this little hallway that was there, and he managed to kind of keep him out. I was trying to get people to understand. It's like, why? It's fine.
Yeah.
Maybe just think about it for just a minute. Maybe just stop and just kind of maybe just take a second and say, I mean, they're not being violent or doing awful things. Because the next crowd was the police were there constantly, and I think that it was really a mess. So,
and just like the general population, right? The general population have people who commit crimes and people who don't. Housed people commit crimes, and then some housed people do not, right? So there's going to be
drugs.
People who do things. Yeah, and there's a lot. And here's my plug for this: there are a lot of housed people who do drugs, and it does not affect their housing. It's really important to remember. A lot of housed people do drugs, and it does not affect their housing. And we hold those people to a different standard. We hold them to a really different standard when they're housed and do drugs. And I think it's important to remember that in and of itself, that's really not the real issue here. The real issue is all of these cycles, all of these things holding people back, all of these barriers, not having a this document, not having a that, not being able to get to appointments on time, not charging your cell phone, not being able to have a safe place to sleep. Those are the things that really keep people homeless.
Yeah. Yeah. Is there anything on the horizon we should be watching out for, paying attention to? Legislation, candidates?
I think that in general that there's many different candidates. This is 2022, so this is a big year for elections, kind of all over, from small to big to everywhere. So for anyone listening, I would say to listen to what candidates' views are on homelessness, because they'll probably have something in their platform about it because it's a big issue, and to listen carefully that they are talking about solutions to homelessness that are not all just people making better choices.
Or we're going to get them off the streets so you don't have to see them.
Yes. Because if all the solutions to homelessness revolve around people choosing to not be homeless, well, then we would have already solved it. If you could just will yourself into being not homeless, then there wouldn't be a homeless problem. If it was just about people feeling bad for the choices they make, gosh, we wouldn't make bad choices anymore. But that isn't enough. We need more policy decisions. So when you listen to candidates talk about it, if they say things like, making sure that people take responsibility for their homelessness and stuff like that, it's not to say that people don't have responsibility. They absolutely do. But solving the homelessness crisis can't start with the people experiencing it.
Right.
We as a society are responsible for them becoming homeless. So we as a society need to figure out how to help them out of it. So when candidates talk like that, that's something to look for. The other thing is when there's affordable housing legislation coming up, make sure to really look into that. Don't just listen to what people say. Don't just listen to the ads, because the ads are paid for, and all of the ads, regardless of the side, are usually for people who have money in the game. So actually research, and if you can, I really encourage, read the text of the bills. I know that sounds like a lot, but for those of you out there listening who have time and who, have a warm, comfy house, and you can sit there on a Saturday morning with a cup of coffee and read through things, really do it to be informed and then tell your friends. And if you have questions, ask people questions. If you're not sure what it's like, to serve people experiencing homelessness, contact any of your local service providers. And I guarantee you, and I know I'm speaking for other people here, but I think they will want to talk to you about that experience. The Housing Matters campus over on Coral Street, they have open houses where people can come and ask questions. So my advice is to really just get involved and stay involved, even if that's only just with information, and then help bust myths. When you hear a person, at a party say, 80% of homeless people are from blah, 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 just say, no. And you can be kind about it. You don't have to be angry about it. Just let people know the truth. Honestly, it's not about changing their mind. They can feel whatever they want to feel, but if they're going to say facts, you might as well make sure they have the right ones. So those are some things that I feel are concrete that everyone can do, is just learn a little more information, keep a little empathy in mind, and then make sure that people are saying true facts.
Yeah. And look for the resources that have someone who's actually working with the homeless kind of named on that thread.
Not just your neighbor Debbie down the street who's seen 5 homeless people walk in front of her house, like that's not going to cut it for data and information.
Yeah. Or next door.
Yes. And please, if you can, I know this sounds like a lot and it maybe is a big ask, but if you are on some sort of social media thread and people are saying a lot of misinformation, please gently, kindly, and compassionately try and set them straight. And if not, you can just go ahead and tag me and I will try and help you out there, because I'm really big at meeting people where they're at. I'm serious about that. My Facebook name is Tatiana Stone. You just go ahead and tag me in something. And if you're not sure about the stats, I'll look them up for you, because that really matters to me, that we have the right information out there.
Right.
And for organizations like Wings that I work with, it makes it really hard for us to do our work when misinformation is out there.
Yeah.
So even if you can't donate money to organizations, just make sure that there's the right information so that everyone can support us in this really important work that we're doing, this life-changing work.
Very good. Very good. Well, I really appreciate you being on. I want to cut it short. I've cut it short. It's been a while because I could just keep going. I could just keep talking about this. I realize there's bad actors and I don't want to discount, but there, like you said, there's bad actors everywhere. And I meet those too. I own a laundromat and I work with housed people who 99.95% are very good people, but there are a few people that they just, for whatever reasons, they can't be good. So there's a slice of life out there. You have to make sure that you understand it's going to happen in all facets. It's not just these guys, and
yeah.
And we've all met them. So I really appreciate that. Maybe you could come on again soon. You know what I need to do is have Wings on. I'd love to have Peggy and Caroline on. I know Peggy's a little shy. I would love to have them on. So
yeah.
And then I will hopefully soon be joining the Streets Team Council. And so I'll be doing some stuff with them on the podcast
wonderful.
too. So
yeah. And for people who out there who are looking for meaningful volunteer opportunities, Wings has some really great ones. So feel free to contact.
do. And it's one of the best organizations that let you kind of figure out where and how you want to work. We kind of figured out a niche for me and it's just perfect. So that's the other great thing about them too, is they're very flexible on how you can work with them. So thank you again. I really appreciate it. Now, how can people
thank you
find
so much for having me.
Let's plug you here really quick.
Yeah. So Wings Advocacy, the organization is www.wingsadvocacy.org.
Okay.
That's wingsadvocacy.org. You can find us on Instagram and you can find us on Facebook. And we look forward to seeing you there.
Awesome. Thank you again.